Chapter 31. A Free Kill. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Although the players were not used to the mysterious bending of physical common sense under the rule of skill, fighting monsters became easier when they became familiar with their skills. After all, without any supernatural powers, all they could do against monsters were normal slashes, somersaulting or barrel rolls. Aside from being boring, the lack of offensive and evasive moves was very dangerous. It certainly should be known that fighting against monsters in the real world was not as rigid as the AI in Monster Hunter. Moreover, that game has the gimmick called mods. Meanwhile, the Skull King spider has lost its advantage of lurking in the miasma to ambush the players. Instead, caught off guard by the players' skills, it was killed by their hands despite being a notch above them in level. In the end, with the players' unending barrages of skills, not only was the Skull King spider's years of experience honed into second nature unhelpful, it had also hindered itself. Additionally, the four players were companions who had left Kennington Village and had developed a tacit partnership from the very start. At the moment, they were indisputably the most skillful of players in battle, and by fighting cautiously to avoid the Skull King spider's jaws, they easily ground it to death. In fact, they would have ended the fight even more quickly if each of them did not have to hold up a torch. Still, it was only when the four players continued on their journey after the Skull King spider was killed that they noticed a serious problem. Visibility in the deadly miasma was 12 meters, higher than expected, but it remained foggy as ever. Everything beyond what they could see was the same bizarre purple color, with nothing recognizable as markers for direction. It was virtually impossible to keep track of directions even if they kept in mind their surroundings. Therefore, after journeying along for a period, the four of them realized that they had gotten lost as if naturally. In fact, if not for the trail of green blood splattered over the ground after their battle against the Skull King spider, they would not even have realized that they were going in circles. This can't continue, Go-Dan scowled and said grimly. If we keep running blind, we might turn around and leave instead. The others were equally serious. To tell the truth, it would have been alright to have the entire group fall here in the Valley of the Tragic Dead. They would have been heroes who offered their lives for exploring this place. But to keep running around in circles and suddenly leaving the dungeon from the same entrance you came from was a little embarrassing. We don't really have a solution even if you say that. Joe sighed feebly, leaning on his sword. We can't see the sun or the stars in this damned place. There's not even a tree around, even the most seasoned of hunters wouldn't find his direction around here. Should we mark the ground with arrows? Elena suggested. It won't work, Edward replied, shaking his head. The ground is soft and many revenants walk over it, any mark would quickly vanish. Wasn't there supposed to be a lot of traces of our fight against that big spider? If not for that trail of blood, none of us would have known we just fought here. Then what should we do? Go-Dan asked distractedly. Edward stroked his chin as a twinkle flashed through his eyes. Actually, I've been puzzled all along why the God of Games would insist on having around 3 to 6 players in a group to take on this outskirts, Valley of the Tragic Dead mission. It is only after coming inside that I know that a single torch can already cover the range of 6 people. In other words, the requirement of everyone having their own torch basically means nothing apart from being a ticket to come inside. He then turned to the other 3 and told them what he had in mind. The God of Games didn't set the rule of everyone having their own torch to waste our time and energy. Being so wise and powerful, he absolutely wouldn't come up with some boring and mean trick. If I'm not wrong, that requirement itself has to do with clearing this dungeon. In fact, the reason our journey so far had been easy was because some of the weaker revenants wandering in the deadly miasma seemed to fear the power of these torches and would keep their distance. Edward, what are you trying to say? Joe the limber one was left utterly confused, whereas Elena and Go-Dan seemed to vaguely catch on to the idea. What I mean to say is, Edward concluded carefully as if he had stumbled upon a secret that would stun the world, if we stick the torches into the ground, it could help us find our way. The torch itself dispersed the miasma and illuminated a single direction, allowing them to see that bit of light even when they were 100 meters away. Most revenants would not simply attack the torch idol, and apart from ensuring that the torch would not easily be lost, it acted as an alarm to a certain extent. Once it vanishes, it indicates that a powerful enemy was behind them. Furthermore, the clearing conditions of Outskirts, Valley of the Tragic Dead, was only 1% in each occasion. It was not demanding when it comes to combat, and it works as long as they could cover the effective range. I see. You really are the brains, Edward. Joe exclaimed in understanding. That's for sure. We wouldn't have thought of it if it wasn't for you, Edward, Dan added. Edward, you're awesome. Elena cheered softly for Edward as well. Edward himself scratched the back of his head. It's nothing, really, he said, slightly embarrassed. Our God is the awesome one who so discreetly hid such clues and hints in the gameplay and exploration process. Meanwhile, Shi Wei sighed heavily when he saw what happened in the Divine Kingdom. Dear him. He never thought that far. The requirement of everyone bringing their own torch was indeed just to delay the players from entering the dungeon and without deeper meaning. Indeed, Shi Wei never thought that the players would be lost in direction within the deadly miasma since there were mini-dot maps whenever he played. With things having become what it was now, Shi Wei could not just descend before them to tell them they are wrong, and that their God did not think that far. Therefore, he could only watch as the four youths from Kennington drove their torches into the ground as they kept moving forward, even if their path this time was straight. It was a pity that when they used the last torch and the exploration incidentally progressed to 0.95% person that a monster hidden in the miasma ambushed them. Caught defenseless, even Elena, the best of them did not manage to escape. All four died one after another, and the pioneering expedition to the Valley of the Tragic Dead was hence destroyed. When they were resurrected beside the Lifestone 3 days later, they saw Marnie, who had been revived earlier, bragging to the players who did not dare to enter the valley. I'm telling you, that spider has large round eyes. He started drawing images in the air as he reached the climax. I immediately froze in shock. I was ambushed. But why didn't you attack? Someone gloated. I did, but was insta-killed. What can I say? Marnie cried regretfully, slapping his own thigh. What the hell? A free kill. Another player laughed. Is it a free kill when it's the front line? Marnie remained stubborn. The players laughed, filling the area around the Lifestone with a happy atmosphere. Chapter 32. A new person 3 days later. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. While the first expedition had fallen in the Valley of the Tragic Dead and the other players remained in the starter village as they waited for them to be revived, Shi Wei turned his eyes to another place. Leah Yakaran was leading what few of her guardsmen left, crossing mountains and ridges to make haste for the starter village, just outside of the Valley of the Tragic Dead. At the moment, they were taking a break in a small city called Wikidor to resupply. The town itself was not too far away from the Valley of the Tragic Dead, and Shi Wei estimated that it would take them 1 or 2 days to reach the starter village. Leah's escorting guards were shallow believers of the God of Games, the kind of people who would offer a brief prayer when they encounter divine statues. Nonetheless, it was a habit that developed in their younger years when the Tierra Empire still existed, and not the prayer that the devoted offered. After Shi Wei had rescued them, although the truth was that Shi Wei wanted to save Leah and they were simply a bonus, just as they were encircled by the cult of rotten bones, however, the guardsmen became much more devoted in their faith toward the God of Games. As Leah, who had changed class and leveled up in the journey while gradually revealing her power, they even skipped the phase of true believers and immediately became devout believers of the God of Games. After all, Leah's hidden class warrior princess was just like Elena's Saintess. In training, characters who were considerably bugged in the gaming sense. Under ordinary circumstances, they would completely decimate other players of equal combat ability, not to mention that other players were still dwelling in basic classes, and the class change system was yet to be made. Either way, the players of this world were all his believers, and there was no need to worry that they would break the balance aspect of the game. Furthermore, the guardsmen who were able to follow Leah until now were themselves hand-picked by the imperial family of Tierra, royal guards who held devout faith in the god of games. If not for the lack of any providence from the god of games during Tierra's fall that resulted in their loss of faith, they would probably have become Shi Wei's first group of zealots after he transmigrated. Nevertheless, they immediately became devout believers after regaining their faith, getting into character far faster than the other believers. Still, on an interesting note, those guardsmen had all picked the warrior class when they rose past the level of shallow believers and activated their own systems. It directly increased the ratio of warrior classes to other classes, with mages and rangers just behind them. Instead, it was the cleric class that proved few in number. In the first class.change page, Shi Wei had put in some explanation and demonstration of class skills. However, most users preferred playing the hero, be it in this world or back on Earth. That was why once his believers had a look of the explanation and footage, their first pick would be the strong and courageous warriors or the cool and powerful mage. The ranger class also had a strong charm to it. Being agile, swift and formidable in long-range attacks, and as such was quite popular as well. It was the clerics, who have a hard time in direct confrontation against any enemy. Their earliest skills were also only support and not appealing at all, and naturally none of the players would want to play that role. In that regard, Shi Wei wanted very much to yell at them, "Don't you fools know that the cleric class is the class closest to God? 1 After the class change system was complete, he would have them know the horrors of after-game versions updated. Still, as Shi Wei kept his eye on Leah's group, he unwittingly noticed that cultists from the Rotten Bones had actually started to show up in Wikidor as well. At first, Shi Wei was shocked, believing that the cultists' influence had expanded to Wikidor in days. However, it proved not to be the case. After he looked carefully, the cultists in the city were few in number. If it was another god's stronghold, with their church established in it, the region would be filled in the god's divine fury, and not even another god would be able to see inside it. And Shi Wei did not find any place like that. By observing the behavior of the cultists, Shi Wei realized that they appear to be there in pursuit of Leah's group. Carlo, the middle-aged man who betrayed the god of games. While the actual reason was unclear, it probably was because the cultists had discovered traces left after Leah's group was teleported away, and then used some special move to track and follow them. With that in mind, Shi Wei was relieved. As long as the cult of Rotten Bones did not expand and their divinity was not promoted at its essence, he had nothing to fear. He was not at all concerned about the safety of Leah's group. In all fairness, the Rotten Bones outnumbered Leah, and their men were not lacking in ability even when compared to Carlo. Although they were not strictly as powerful as Carlo, Shi Wei could feel Rotten Bones' blessing exuding from their bodies, which alone allows them to stand with Carlo as equals. One should certainly note that Carlo was the captain of Tierra's Imperial Guard and Princess Leah's own sword instructor. His ability was certainly imaginable. As for the reason that the cult would send so many of their finest to track down Leah's group was probably fear that they would make things worse, that they would surrender themselves to an Orthodox church and informing them about the cult's hideout in Lancaster. After all, that was the cult's main base, and if they got wind of it, the Orthodox Church would probably purge them entirely right after they established themselves in that city. Even if they were not wiped out, they certainly would be dealt a heavy blow. If it was days ago, it would be certain death for Leah's group against the cultists' finest. Things were different now, however. Leah's group obtained new power and leveled up continuously by killing monsters in their journey after obtaining the system. In fact, so what if the impossible worst would happen and Leah's skill proved lacking, and their entire group would die? The rotten bones were unaware of Shiwei's horrific law-breaking creation that was the system. Even if their heads were cut off, it was but a flesh wound, and a new person 3 days later. Chapter 33. Kill him. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Leah was on the streets, carefully looking for any place they could resupply. While the believers of the god of games were not indiscriminately hated, they still would not be warmly received. Moreover, Leah the former princess was a wanted criminal, and she would definitely catch some attention if she boldly walked into a tavern to buy food. It was more convenient for her to get her supplies from shops run by neutral churches. "Your Highness, we're being followed," one of her guards suddenly whispered. Leah did not recklessly turn her head to alert their pursuers. It was not the first time she was being followed over the years, even gaining a certain amount of counter-tracking experience in return. She pretended to be interested in some antique displayed on a roadside stall, looking interested and cheerful as she spoke to the guard who alerted her. "Could we have been found by clerics? Could you see who it is?" "I'm sorry, Your Highness." The guard shook his head. "They are well hidden, it's by luck that we actually found them. Anyone else looking from out of earshot would think that they were siblings." A younger sister wanting something from the stall while the brother protested. "Well, there's no helping it. Withdraw, Bedo.M." Leah considered it for just a moment and immediately came to a decision. "Let's meet up inside the woods in front of the city after shaking them off." Since their pursuers did not make a move immediately after finding them, it meant that they were afraid of exposing themselves in public. That was a clear sign that their pursuers did not serve the banners of light and order, that they were not from the Orthodox churches such as the brilliant White Church who would have simply made a move. Then, after eliminating the possibility that they were slave traders as well, it meant that the cultists have caught up to them again. The other guards made a hand sign that they were ready, and at Leah's own response, all of them abruptly spread out and sneaked inside the alleys on both sides of the streets. They moved very suddenly, and by deliberately covering Leah's form, they blindsided the cultists who did not expect them to split up despite their dire lack of numbers. Which alley was it, damn it? After checking twice that they were free from their pursuers, Leah and her escort all arrived at the forest before the others. That was when they realized that someone was already there. Uncle Carlo. Tangled emotions arose in Leah as the man stood with his hand clasped behind his back in the woods. "Why are you here?" "I watched you grown up, Your Highness." Carlo slowly turned to gaze upon Leah. "It's not just the ways of the sword, I've taught you every trick and strategy after Tierra fell, and I know how you think like the back of my hand. After you realized that you were being followed and splitting up to escape, I could guess that you will be meeting up on the east side of the city by tracing your routes. Wouldn't it be too normal to see that you would end up here by judging your habits, and with a little observation? Your Highness, be careful. He's no longer our captain." The only escorting guardsman beside Leah warned nervously. "I know." Leah nodded. The system identified Carlo as an enemy, with a HP bar hovering his head. There was also an icon that indicated the buff status of corruption. She only had to focus on the icon to tell that the buff effects were 10% increase of strength, speed, and stamina, as well as poisoned attacks. Although corruption sounded like a debuff, it was actually a blessing that rotten bones give to its followers. Still, even if the buff did not appear too significant, it was just days after Carlo was formally initiated into rotten bones. And while he did not have much accomplishment save for his betrayal of Leah, he still managed to earn an all-attribute buff of 10% from the evil god. It was clear how much more he could be if he continued on his path. "Leah, be rest assured. I'll earn the rotten bones' trust with your head, and when I'm powerful, I would accomplish your wish and exact vengeance upon those who defiled Tierra." Carlo slowly approached her as he slowly drew his sword. "You're kidding. I don't have such a dull wish." Leah drew her own sword as well, knowing that there was nowhere to run and that exposing her back to the enemy was the most foolish of choices. I'm no longer the girl who counted on you for everything, Uncle Carlo. Or should I say, Traitor Carlo. That's a good look on your face, Carlo smiled, but that left Leah feeling a chill instead. Looks like wandering has grown you sufficiently, Your Highness. You might even have made a fine queen. It's a shame that the growth of the heart does not help with ability, and you will die here. Run, Your Highness. I'll hold him. Leah's guard stood between her and Carlo, glaring at the latter as he slowly came to them as if he was a boss. The god of games be with you. The guard was aware that the system allows adjustment of pain levels, and he thought that by keeping it at its minimum would allow him to ignore any agony as he put his life on the line, delaying Carlo and giving Leah a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Leah stared nervously at Carlo, furiously thinking whether she should choose fight or flight. She was a little confused because she had never once bested Carlo, and the fact that she could not win had been engraved into her bones, even suffocating her. But in that very moment, a semi-transparent tab suddenly opened in front of her eyes. Ding! You have started a side quest, kill him. The naming style of the quest was simple, violent and rather crude, clearly different from before. Nevertheless, Leah's noticed that her anxiety eased, her muddled head turning into calmness as she relaxed considerably. There's no need to run, Leah's heart was filled with determination thanks to the encouragement from the quest. Because I will defeat you right here. Oh. Carlo narrowed his eyes, his face became dangerous. There is only one reason for your defeat, Carlo. The girl raised her sword. You betrayed the god of games. Chapter 34. How is that a sword skill? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Carlo had no intention of defending himself or debate with Leah's side. As her teacher of the sword and of life, he knew that he could no longer sway her whatever he would say now. The only way was to fight. He brandished his long sword, before shooting forward at Leah like a bolt of dark lightning. With the 10% boost on strength, speed, and stamina, his attacks were far faster. In his mind, even if Leah would analyze him through her experiences with him in training, there was no stopping his blow. And yet, he was blocked by the guard beside Leah. Carlo, you are never reaching Her Highness. He roared. Boris. And here I was thinking the vice-captain would have better brains. But it looks like you're no different. Carlo sneered belittlingly. He was the one who personally trained every Imperial Guard, and knew at heart every man's skill. Moreover, although Boris was given the rank of vice-captain amongst the surviving member of the Guardsmen, that was because he was good at handling various duties and could better aid Princess Leah. In terms of actual ability, he was a bottom feeder. In fact, Carlo thought he could just use Boris to threaten and dismantle Leah's morale. With that decided, Carlo repelled Boris with an elegant flurry of slashes, before knocking him off balance and cutting off Boris's right wrist, his sword hand. It's over. Boris would be no more than a toothless hound with his right hand and weapon lost, and could not be at a threat at all. Carlo knew that his wretched state would definitely break the princess's will. Nonetheless. No, it's not. Boris was still holding his sword. He continued trading slashes with Carlo in his clumsy sword style. Steel clanged as they fought, and Carlo was confused. No, I did cut his hand off, he thought. At best it would be still attached to a thin piece skin. So why does it look like nothing happened? Air launch. Boris cried. Are you trying to make me, the best swordsman in the Empire, laugh with that funny sword skill? Boris, not only did you not improve, you're becoming worse. Before Carlo could finish, he was knocked up into the air by Boris despite the latter's clearly lacking the wrist power. Carlo was utterly bewildered. That skill made no sense at all. Nonetheless, being Tierra's finest, he quickly shifted his weight, turned and swung out at Boris as the latter closed in to land steadily on the ground. It was just two little surprises, but Carlo was not going to keep underestimating Boris. As he started to fight at his best, Carlo immediately left Boris on his back foot, even if he was still perplexed. Boris had clearly been stabbed a few times now. Carlo could feel his blows land on him and there were spurts of blood. Even so, the wound would disappear with the turn of an eye, and his attempts to sever Boris's tendons to disable him was utterly impossible. Moreover, even if his 10% stamina buff, the vicious sword fighting left him a little tired and gasping for air. On the other hand, Boris was just like before and not at all tired. Everything was so weird. What did he actually go through in the last 3 days? More worryingly, Leah had yet to make a move. Her talent for the sword was considerable and she was one of the best even amongst the Imperial Guard. Though she had learned sword skills for appearances before Tierra's fall, she trained diligently and never once relaxed when she finally shouldered the duty to avenge her fallen nation. In fact, she was just next to Carlo himself in skill. Nonetheless, Carlo was 90% sure that he would easily defeat her just 3 days ago, and it was also why he kept trying to provoke her just now. But now, Boris's abnormal change lost him that confidence. While he did not know the reason, if Boris was already so powerful, would the princess's ability not reach new heights? "Boris, stand down." The girl suddenly spoke. "Your Highness." Boris pulled away from Carlo, albeit reluctantly. Not quite understand her thoughts, Carlo did not try to sneak a strike, and instead stared at the impassive girl. Unlike Carlo who was fighting blind, Leah's could see Boris's stamina bar from their group stats. Once his stamina was exhausted, he would earn a fatigue debuff and his stats would all fall rapidly. With his blood lacking, Carlo would probably kill him with a single swing. Even if he could be revived, she did not want to watch as a loyal retainer died. Understanding Leah's resolve, Boris followed orders even if he did not want to. "Now, it's my turn." The girl flicked the hilt of a sword. Then, with a forceful swing, the silver blade turned into a bladed whip as if it was a snake. Carlo sighed. "I never taught you to use such a vulgar weapon to entertain the masses. You'll see if it's vulgar soon enough." She swung her weapon's hilt, and the whip blade shot at Carlo, hissing as it cut through the air. Carlo quickly parried but was sent flying, only able to hold himself steady after stumbling a few steps backward. He was utterly astonished. He clearly had that 10% buff in strength, why couldn't he block a single blow? When did the princess become so strong? Leah pressed her advantage, but Carlo was prepared and evaded her blow. "I just have to get used to it and dodge it just like a whip. It's so repetitive compared to your sword skills, Your Highness." Carlo mocked when he saw that she had no other technique other than her whip sword, attempting to throw her off her rhythm with words for a chance to counterattack. "Then have a taste of my sword skill, Carlo." Leah calmly retorted. "Bloody cross." A gentle flick of her whip reverted the whip sword to its blade form. As she slashed the air diagonally twice, a blood-colored cross appeared and shot towards Carlo at her soft cry. Unable to avoid, Carlo could only dig in to try parrying again. However, the radiant blade slashed dispersed and cut him. How was that a sword skill? It was clearly magic. Damn! Wounded and leaving an opening, Carlo reacted at once. But he was just a move too slow. Leah's rushed to a foot away from him, and used a skill he taught her to pierce his heart. That power! Where did you get it? He gasped inaudibly. As Leah pulled her sword out from him, Carlo fell to the ground on his back. "It's a blessing from the god of games," the girl replied, "the god you betrayed." "Really? So? I was a step behind." Carlo said unhappily, his eye fading in color even as he looked at the skies. "I'm sorry, Leah. I just wanted my revenge. I hate it so much." Leah hesitated for a moment, but finally lowered herself and gently closed Carlo's eyes. "I'll avenge you," she said gently. "May your soul find peace." Chapter 35. 1% Explored. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Leah watched as Carlo's corpse slowly vanished into thin air like a puff of smoke. All enemies killed by players would be presented to the god of games as offerings. It was a rule that came with the blessing of the system through faith in him. It was true that Shi Wei, who had been watching everything unfold, could choose not to take Carlo's corpse and allow Leah to bury her former teacher. However, he had no such intention. If he started to dote over his believers on every little thing and clean up their mess every time, they could get too used to it. Even if they would feel the grace and gratitude towards him at first, they would quickly become upset should there be certain lacking in his concern, and they might even turn their backs on his church. That is basically what it means to be codependent. Therefore, the gods must keep a certain distance from their followers. If they get too close, the followers would instead lose their reverence towards them. "Your Highness." Boris looked at the single piece of black bone left where Carlo's corpse had been, his attitude toward Leah in turn becoming more respectful now. "What should we do now?" Although Leah would join the fight against beasts and magical creatures they encountered over the last few days, she remained a noble princess and would mostly be the one delivering the last blow to gain EXP. That was why it was only now that Boris finally realized how powerful she was, and could so easily defeat Carlo, whom himself could never hope to best. As expected of the warrior princess who earned the respect of the god of games. She was completely different from ordinary footmen like them. Leah recovered from her silent dejection then. In reality, not even Leah herself expected that her ability would rise so immensely after gaining the system. Since she never really fought before and the system itself had many vague terms for its explanation of its different skills, she did not find that her new training was any different from the sword skills she learned before. When Carlo intercepted them, she was also ready to die just like Boris, only to find that the power in the different skills available in the system to be powerful beyond imagination when she really fought. It was Carlo who was cut down in just a few strokes. Though Carlo himself was taken by surprise thanks to the different skill effects, Leah imagined that she would lose even in a direct clash of swords. It left the girl feeling the irony. If only Carlo would have kept a little faith in the god of games, even if for just a moment longer, he clearly would have earned any power far beyond the blessings of evil gods, helping him greatly on his path to revenge. It was a pity that he could not wait for just a few days more after holding back for so long, joining Rotten Bones and turning his back on the god of games and finally meeting his fate. It was lamentable. Leah's chest felt hot at the thought. With the system's power, she just might reclaim her base near Lancaster. Still, she threw away that idea right after it came to her. While her sword skill was formidable, she remained a mortal without any supernatural powers and could easily be killed. In the end, Rotten Bones were a cult, and there must be a few cultists who had mastered such powers, meaning that her inferior skills would not be so effective in a fight. Furthermore, even if all the Rotten Bones cultists would never best her, they outnumbered her group of just 6 immensely. With limited MP and stamina, they were never going to destroy an entire cult. That was why their best choice now was to continue their journey to the unnamed town where they could recruit other players to help their cause. With enough people, they could return to Lancaster and destroy the Rotten Bones in one swift stroke. "We'll wait for the others," Leah said clearly as she sheathed her sword and pulled the strands of her blonde hair hanging beside her eyes. "We'll continue towards the Valley of the Tragic Dead." "As you command." Boris replied, half kneeling as he reveled in her might, and how she was slowly resembling their former king. The players of the starter village were not idle even as Leah defeated their pursuers and continued on their journey toward starter village. When Alina and the others were revived, they trained to level up, earned sufficient reputation to buy miasma, clearing torches and simply formed a new party with the leader of the merchant escort team. After that, they headed out to the Valley of the Tragic Dead once again. Thanks to the experience from their last visit, their journey this time was much smoother. With the lowest level of revenants repelled by the divine power in the torches and the absence of high-level revenants in the outskirts of the valley, they fought enemies stronger than low-level revenants but not too formidable, just within their range of abilities. Be that as it may, it still took them considerable time to finish their exploration quest. It was on their last torch that they finally reached the required 1% exploration, after of which the quest completion message they expected for so long finally popped up. It says we just have to stick the last torch in the ground. Edward, who was acting captain, did as instructed. In a split second, the fist-sized flame over the torch instantly burst out and consumed the entire torch, before rising into the air to form a massive pillar of flame. Their entire group jumped and retreated a step behind, startled. However, the fire did not keep expanding. It descended instead, and turned into a bonfire as Alina and the others watched, a long spiral sword of unusual design sticking out from it. What is it? Is that sword a quest reward? Delighted at the sight of a prize, Marnie went up to pull out the sword, but his entire body was immediately consumed by rising flames and vanished the moment he touched the bonfire. The others were certainly stunned by the abrupt turn of events. I can't revive him. Could Mr. Marnie have died without a corpse left again? Alina tried to cast a revive spell at the direction of the bonfire, but nothing happened. Again, indeed. The corners of Godan's lips twitched. With the 30% loss of experience, it feels like his efforts in this dungeon are wasted. It is really sad, but why do I want to laugh? Warrior Joe scratched his face, slightly embarrassed. We don't have to mourn him since he's going to be revived anyway, the escort captain and new addition to the party calmly suggested. No, you've got that wrong. It seems that Mr. Marnie is not showing up as dead in our team list. Edward the acting captain extended his hand towards the bonfire but did not touch it, and understanding soon showed on his face. I see. The bonfire is our God's creation that could send us directly back to the Life Stone. Next time, we could directly resume our exploration deep into the valley. Chapter 36. The Religion of a Ball. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Aside from the bonfire and unnoticed by the players, their surroundings were changing slightly aside as well. Two chests, one red and one blue, appeared within the light of the bonfire, as well as a semi-domed tent. Apart from Marnie, who was teleported away because of his eager touching, the others studied those new things around them in interest. It appeared that the red chest was a supply chest according to the text hovering over it, but there was nothing inside it at the moment. Meanwhile, the blue chest was called the loot box. Players could dump any ingredients or unusable equipment they obtained in the dungeon to redeem game coins and EXP. There were simple beds inside the tent as well. Edward lay down to try it, and realized that it rapidly restores his stamina reserves. Look, guys. What's that? Alina asked as she climbed into the tent, catching sight of a small statue. It was not as if she had not seen a statue, there were carpenters back home after all. Still, the statue was very unusual. Apart from the pedestal, it was nothing more than a weird ball. It might be the holy statue of the god of games, the escort captain simply said when he saw that statue, not quite bothered to think about it. No way. That's really disrespectful to our Lord. Doug A.G., otherwise known as Godan, quickly retorted, having become so loyal to the god of games that he was almost a zealot. Alina, Joe, and Edward all nodded in agreement. All of them had seen Shiwei's mortal form firsthand. Why would the great god of games be a ball? Sorry, I'm just joking. I'm very devout, you know. The escort captain naturally would not stubbornly insist on his own view and apologized cheerfully, before picking up the statue to look at it more carefully. However, just a moment later, his eyes narrowed sharply. Wait. Take a look at these words at the bottom. The God of games, yet to come up with a form to take, made in the divine kingdom. Dot. The thought, what the hell, appeared in everyone's mind at once. Could it be that we've simply met a clone of the God of games, but his true form is really a ball? Joe looked visibly shaken, gingerly voicing his thoughts. How? Dan was completely stunned and clearly in disbelief. That was when Edward, who had a moment to arrange his thoughts, faked a cough. Do not panic. Even if this statue had really been made in the divine kingdom, it does not prove that our God is a ball. He deduced seriously. After all, even if believers would enter the divine kingdom after death, they might not really get to meet him. This statue is probably something made by a devout believer who ascended to the divine kingdom, but I also remembered that Marnie mentioning that the God of games was a new deity that appeared in the last 100 years. Unlike the ancient gods and without actual divine myths spread across the world, not knowing how to sculpt the God of games makes perfect sense. Why? Yes, as expected of you, Edward. Elena's face brightened in understanding. Even Dan, whose life perspective had just been shaken, calmed down and nodded as if he was convinced. It was only the escort captain who still held doubts, but he just wasn't stupid enough to say it. If my guess is correct, for this thing to be kept inside this tent, it probably must be linked to some hidden mission. Edward continued. And it might be a major quest to our predecessor who has ascended into the divine kingdom. To think that such a thing is actually possible. So how do we start the quest? The horror, the horror. Hurry up, hurry up. In his divine kingdom, Shi Wei watched as Edward deduced away as boldly as a lion, although he was getting nothing right. He could not help finding it funny. He had made that statue of himself to strengthen and alter that bonfire save point. By exuding Shi Wei's divine presence, it would scare off any revenants trying to luck, and that the lingering divine powers inside the Valley of the Tragic Dead would not destroy the bonfire. Apart from that, the statue was also an anchor point with which players teleported. Naturally, it was only by clearing the area ahead that they could teleport to corresponding anchor points since player IDs were tied to each respective system, so Shi Wei did not have to worry about the players attempting any tricks. The statue was also crafted through the scraps left after Shi Wei had absorbed the monsters that his players sent to him as offerings. It was basically no different from the game coins, and was also added with special attributes by Shi Wei. Players could play around with the statue but within the bonfire's range, because they would never be able to take it away. Additionally, after the players had left the bonfire, the sacred statue would be sent back to its original position inside the tent wherever else they would put it. Shi Wei had already made 100 of such statues, and would put one in each new bonfire established as the players ventured further inside the Valley of the Tragic Dead until it was fully explored. Okay. With that, the dungeon system in the valley is basically finished. The rest is up to the players and the revenants in that place. 11 Wei nodded, satisfied with his work. Soon, however, he grimaced. After Elena and the others succeeded in preaching to the merchant convoy and secure a major score of divine energy, his income reached a stable period. There would always be a portion coming to him, but beyond that, he would not be obtaining additional profits. It was after he had completed the statues and various items for the dungeon that Shi Wei realized that his divine energy reserves were pathetically low once again. Moreover, the new dungeon facilities in the Valley of the Tragic Dead needed everyday maintenance, not to mention that the various buildings in Starter Village as well as the anti-weather crops in the farms were also exceeding his budget estimates in divine energy. With things dragging on, the divine energy he has left every day became lesser. If he could not think of a way to save up, Shi Wei might have to stay in the Starter Village and the Valley of the Tragic Dead for some time. Just as Shi Wei thought furiously about future plans to recruit new believers, he suddenly noticed that Marnie, who had been teleported back to the Starter Village ahead of the others, was taking out his merchant caravan, and was preparing to leave. Puzzled for moments, Shi Wei soon realized the reason. Although Marnie Wilf had definitely joined the Church of the God of Games, he had another identity. A traveling merchant of the Silver Chimes Group. He had been staying for some time in the starter village. He now must return to his merchant group to report in before continuing his trip. Shi Wei used his tentacle to rub what was supposed his chin and mumbled thoughtfully, "Well, that fellow just might work." Chapter 37. Hidden Quest. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Marnie Wilf was standing before his convoy. His face was contorted in complete anguish as he gazed upon the starter village. Damn it. If I hadn't received that warning from Silver Chimes to report in, no way I'm going back so early. Then, when Marnie saw the young Lord Angora leading Edward and the other players to see him off, his expression became somber at once. He shook Angora's hand and kept holding on to it, ignoring the latter's efforts to free himself while saying seriously, "Be rest assured, my lord, I shall submit my resignation on this trip to the guild. I'll be back as soon as I can." Is that so? Angora, who had just recently had his coming-of-age ceremony and would still be a child by Earth standards, was aware that he must stay stoic as a superior in any given moment thanks to his noble birth. Still, being clutched by a well-rounded uncle left him very uncomfortable, and he could just flash a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I'll be waiting." On the other hand, the other players were quite willing in parting, even raising a ruckus behind them, shouting out things like, "Marnie, you just want to play the dungeon, take your time, let us have a shot too," or, "Marnie, did you get trashed by a skeleton again?" and leaving Marnie's eyes twitching. "Shut up, you lot and your goblin moms. Don't forget that you're escorts I hired. One more word and I'll have you return with me." He spat back fiercely, and the players who were formerly his escort at once pretended to be looking away and jeered no more. With the presence of the gods in this world, every contract would usually be signed in holy sites such as temples or churches where the divine beings were watching. Therefore, in a certain manner of speaking, this world was better than Earth when it comes to the contractual spirit. In other words, if Marnie insisted on having them continue their jobs as his escorts, they would have to go along no matter how reluctant they were. After all, Edward's party had just accomplished the first phase of the Outskirts, Valley of the Tragic Dead, quest. Having gained a role model, the other players could not wait to enter the valley as well to have an adventure, earn XP and gain coins. Why would they be willing to waste time and escort Marnie back to the Silver Chimes Guild headquarters? And Marnie himself did not hope that the other players would return with him. If it was just him, he would get to hog all XP and loot dropped from any monster or enemy he encountered in his journey. He would have to share if the others came with him, and in the least cost-effective manner. The return trip was already dull in his mind, and it would not do to not have something that he could be entertained with. Either way, he would be revived in the unnamed town even if he died. Having gotten very used to dropping dead, Marnie thought that he had nothing more to fear. Now, having seen that the other players could not retort with a single line from him, Marnie freed Angora's hand and prepared to leave town stylishly. Edward and the others had only intended to see him off. Being comrades who have fought alongside each other for some time, they did share some comradeship. Then, they saw Marnie suddenly pause, his eyes staring into thin air while he mumbled, "Wow. There's a hidden quest." "What did you say?" "Hidden quest." Aside from Angora who had a different system, the other players were at once excited. Warehouse, what hidden quest? I don't know what you're talking about." Marnie played dumb as he recovered from his surprise. "You dog fart. You were going to keep it all to yourself." Even Edward, who had always been mild-mannered and polite, could not hold back from cursing. "It's a hidden quest the god of games gave me as repayment. Don't even think about getting a whiff." Marnie shot back boldly when he realized that he was not going to keep it a secret. "Mother, I never expected someone with your spunk is so useless. You pain in the butt, come fight me one-on-one. Let's go." Marnie never submits to anyone my whole life. Although he was in the divine kingdom, Shi Wei had been spying in the world below with his divine eye, and watched in astonishment as a bunch of players started to duel each other in the unnamed town. At first, it was only Marnie and Edward fighting, but as the fight continued, the other players who had been nursing an itch started to duel each other as well. If Shi Wei had not set duel rules when he first designed the system so that players would be forced to withdraw from a duel when their HP dropped to half, the free.4.all would have ended up with half of the players losing their XP. What the hell are that bunch of monkeys doing? That hidden quest is just having Marnie get in town and preach to some refugees. And didn't I give Edward and the others the same quest before? The reality was that Edward and the others who had not seen much of the world would still maintain their advantage in terms of XP compared to the adult escort mercenaries, even after they had obtained their system. It was also partially why they were rewarded with an epic class item like the Ring of Gospel when the youths had completed their quest. Meanwhile, as the players were still dueling away, two knights riding chocobos one approached town. Why would command have us confirm that the town is wiped out? It's just useless. With that sea of skeletons bearing down upon them, even a small city would fall, much less some little town in the wilderness. A figure in leather armor complained impatiently. I didn't join the secret eye for this. What would you know? The town's fate means nothing. We are here really just to check if the youngest Faust boy is dead. Another figure who was wearing a cloak and appeared much larger replied. In the end, the bone incense that the alchemists had concocted only lures any nearby skeletons, it can't be used to target someone specific. That's what I'm saying. Wouldn't a horde of those skeletons crush some useless noble? Ha! Hold on. Isn't that place looking a little unusual? The man in leather armor narrowed his eyes as he approached the starter village. Tut! It looks unharmed, and there seems to be more people around. But why are they fighting each other? The cloaked man added in confusion. That was when two players incidentally approached the pair. Both of them paused at once, looking at the two men who came out of nowhere. Who are you people? Could you be divine messengers, here to assign us hidden quests? Divine messengers my ass. Can't you see the HP bar on their heads? They're monsters, so kill and ask questions later. ENV. The pair from the secret eye then watched blankly as the two players who were at each other's throats just a second ago started towards them. Chapter 38. The Great System Knows All. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Angora could not understand the other player's behavior. Although he had merely been curious at first how his own system differed from theirs, he realized that there was actually a major difference between them. In fact, it could well be two completely different things. That was probably the reason Angora simply could not understand the reason behind what they do. They were all clearly humans, but they fought like berserkers, often competing to death for kill counts. They also did not fear death since they could be revived, and even talk about their experiences of dying during idle chat after a meal or over drinks. Moreover, there were pairs who could be beating each other fatally just a second ago, after of which they would have a jovial moment as they went together to the only tavern in town. Could the system had made them all straightforward and carefree? Indeed, Angora was a little envious that they could so freely expose their true selves. It certainly did not stop Angora himself from taking the players for fools, since their behavior was all over the place and only ever sought leveling up, better items, and a more pleasant life. Still, the young lord was unaware that it was a common opinion he shared with his own god. Still, today was a first. The hidden quest Marnie received when he was about to depart had become an explosive fuse leading to the biggest free.4.all melee yet. That being said, although it was gory and bloody, Angora had gotten used to the players leaping into duels that the present sight was just a little more thrilling. In fact, it was not just him, the townsfolk had sneakily slid open their windows to watch the show as well, with some of the braver ones cheering for the players whom they were usually close with. Angora got an interesting idea then. If the players increased to a considerable number, he could organize a royal rumble for all of them like the gladiator battles in the cities. And he would definitely make a killing if he was the one selling tickets. It was going to be such a success. My lord, say something. The two players who were sitting style in the town lord's residence, which in fact was Vela's home, were urging him impatiently. Hurry up. Angora quickly collected his drifting thoughts. Yes, compared to the path to fortune, there was a troublesome issue at hand. It started with the free.4.all, with the two players encountering two monsters, as they dueled, monsters who were sinisterly approaching Starter Village. Despite having some moves, the pair was unable to escape despite riding their chocobos as the other players were just nearby. After being given a major beating, they were dragged off and now presented to him. The two players who stumbled upon them were also proudly bragging to Angora, saying something like, "My lord, if it wasn't for the quest we received halfway, you would be seeing two corpses instead." For that, Angora could not help but retort inwardly. Nonsense, would anyone you people killed have corpses left? Still, complaints were complaints. Angora himself was thankful that the other players caught the pair for him. While they seemed to have received strict training, refusing to say a word despite any form of torture and not even smile, they were nothing in comparison to the system. New quest issuing authority gained, investigate the Secret Eye Society, explanation. You have captured two scouts from the Secret Eye Society who have come to confirm that the skeleton horde had destroyed the unnamed town and killed its lord, after the society had lured the skeletons to attack it. The Secret Eye Society's very existence threatens the safety of this prospering town, but to uproot them, one must know it from bottom up. Quest. You may assign the mission Investigate the Secret Eye Society to any number of players, but each assignment costs 20 yield points and 100 game coins. Quest reward. Sentry Watchtower Blueprint, they're scouts from the Secret Eye Society. Angora slid an impassive glance at the pair who were sprawled over the floor like puddles after being handed some major punishment. The cloaked man looked up in surprise, his eyes fixed a little dazedly at Angora as he asked hoarsely in disbelief, "How? How could I possibly know that, you mean? Nonsense. Did you think your luring of those skeletons was flawless?" Angora crossed his fingers beneath his chin, laughing coldly and loftily as he looked down on the cloaked man. "Don't make me laugh. If you knew all along, why torture us?" The cloaked man asked bitterly, understanding at once that Angora was neither putting on airs nor trying to force them to talk as he already knew about the skeleton horde. "Torturing saboteurs of my land and enemies of peace needs no reason," Angora declared sharply. In truth, Angora's quest issuing authority actually came with the requirement of giving those two a good beating beforehand. Still, the prisoners did not need to know that. Finished talking. Can we kill them now? One of the players asked unhappily. Their EXP. Although it would be acceptable to throw the two Secret Eye members to the players and have them gotten rid of, they might still be useful later. Hence, after some thinking, Angora decided to imprison them instead. "We're keeping them alive for the moment," Angora told them. "Throw them down into the dungeon." "Ha! Hold on, there are monsters. You don't steal another man's monster." The player closer to Angora complained. "Yeah. Why would you simply take away our EXP and epic items?" the other player added. "Do these peasants not know respect for their lord?" Angora was irritated inside, but being brothers of the same faith, he naturally could not simply dismiss them. "Kill away, then. It's a shame, but I guess I can't assign you the hidden quest from my end if that's the case." Angora shook his head dramatically. The two players' ears pricked up at the words, "hidden quest." They swiftly snuggled up to Angora as if they were puppies and started bootlicking. After some reflection, "I believe I have an obligation to heed your intentions, my lord." "Say no more, I'll take them away and lock them up." "Yeah. That's why you could be at ease and just hand us that hidden quest or whatnot. Chapter 39. New follower. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Angora pondered again after he had assigned the two players with the quest to investigate the secret eye society and saw them off. First and foremost, the quest itself was definitely unachievable for those two dimwits. It was only by chance that they ran into the scouts they captured, and Angora would definitely be the first to doubt that they could infiltrate the secret eye. If anything, it would be nice if they did not lure the enemy here. Either way, he must assign the new mission to other players. I have the game coins, but the yield points are going to be an issue. Angora scratched his head in distress. After the players had joined, the town's crop production was a lot more rapid. The additional food could also be exchanged for a considerable sum, which allowed Angora to become rich immediately and actually plan for more higher-level crops. He could afford paying everyone 100 game coins like it was a drop in the ocean, but yield points were not so easily obtainable. The yield point system was connected to the prosperity of the town, and the prosperity of the town required more construction of houses and buildings. Now that their population had stabilized and there were actually vacant houses, the prosperity rate had almost stopped rising. That was why the yield points which should be redeemed to buy new buildings was quite precious and must not be wasted. Angora was touching his chin in thought. There was some beard stubble on it as he was almost reaching adulthood, and it felt rough to touch. Have to get some reliable players for this quest. At the moment, the players whom Angora thought highly of was, aside from Marnie who was about to leave, was Edward and his party. Although Marnie himself appeared to be another dimwit occasionally and was frequently killed in the most spectacular manners possible, he was still formerly a leader of a merchant convoy. He checks out whether it was interpersonal relationships, teamwork, and mobility. As for Edward's group, they seemed to be the earliest believers of the god of games and were the top in both levels and combat ability, not to mention that both healers in town were in their group. Most importantly, even if Edward was a little younger than Angora, he took things seriously as the leader of the party. It was an attribute that most players seemed to lose after obtaining the system, becoming carefree like how they were now. Vela, could you help me to call for Edward and... Angora turned to Vela, intending to get her to fetch Edward's group but spaced out when he looked above her. On your head. Her name was written in white words that hovered above her. It seems that I have made it and become a true believer of the god of games. She smiled sweetly at his blank look. Recovering, Angora cheered and gave a silly smile as well. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's celebrate. My lord, don't you have something else to do? She asked, tilting her head. It can wait. Celebrating with you is more important. Angora said seriously. Is that so? The girl's face was a little red in embarrassment. Yeah. If you can become a player, it means that there's nothing stopping the other townsfolk from becoming true believers. All of them can be players. With this, the town is so much safer and powerful. Angora exclaimed, not noticing Vela's expression in his excitement. Is that not worth celebrating? Oh. So we're celebrating that. What's up, Vela? Why do you look unhappy? It's nothing, my lord. Are we celebrating in the tavern today? Of course. There's nowhere else to celebrate in town. Good, the girl grinned dangerously. Incidentally, I haven't tried much of their menu. For some reason, Angora started to worry for his wallet when he saw Vela's sweet smile. In the end, Marnie left the town. So, the guild has recently built a subsidiary in Wikidor. He muttered, reading a map and planning his journey as he sat beside the carriage driver. Even with a carriage, it's going to be a 2-days round trip. No, if I hurry, I might make it back in just a day. Marnie sighed as he lowered the map. Even after all he had been through, Marnie still found the god of games in his own system unreal. Unlike the believers who were limited in knowledge and unaware of the wonders of the system, Marnie, who was almost 30, had virtually traveled from north to south and almost all of the empire. At first, he himself did not understand how horrific it was too, even believing that it was not really useful and that it was a trick that believers of the god of games used for coercing others into their religion. However, Marnie's perspective changed entirely after experiencing it firsthand. It was something that instantly instructs anyone in sword skills, magic or divine arts. It was so glorious that he would definitely believe that it was a sacred relic that some god bestowed upon mortals. If he must put a finger on how the system was different from sacred relics, it would be that the latter was usually one and only, whereas the system was so numerous that every player in the starter had one that was virtually identical. Marnie is unaware that Elena's Saintis.in training system was not the same. Even the 7 Heavenly Fathers did not produce so many relics. I really can't imagine how powerful the god of games actually is. Marnie felt pulsating vigor once he remembered his powerful backer. It seems that I must seriously accomplish the quest that God has given me. Get refugees to join the Church of the God of Games. That was the hidden quest the God of Games had assigned him. To tell the truth, Marnie did not really take the quest seriously. Refugees all flock to those who have anything to give them. With a piece of bread, they would never bat a lash to bow before an evil god, much less the god of games. No, despite his delight from imagining how he would show off his quest reward when he returned, Marnie soon calmed down. It's not easy to join the Church of the God of Games. All of the townsfolk are believers, but none of them are acknowledged by the God of Games himself. In other words, shallow believers wouldn't do. So can this quest really be done by having them become true believers? Looks like I won't be back in town in a day and a half. Instead, I should spend some time away. Chapter 40. Rotten Bones. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. A tavern in Wikidor. It was clearly not nighttime, but it was pitch-black in one of the rooms. A thick black cloth had been placed over the window, keeping the rare bright winter sun from reaching inside the room. If one looked carefully, there were a few vague figures sitting around silently, wearing thin black cloaks and staying motionless, exuding an indescribable weirdness. Indeed, anyone who entered would probably have the daylight scared out of them by those corpse-like figures. And it would have been true too. Each figure there were Rotten Bones cultists who were higher ranked than Carlo and were corrupted heavily by their evil god's power. Although they still retained their human minds, their bodies were shriveled and stiff like hardwood despite having greater strength. They also would not count as being alive in the original sense, but was closer to a semi-zombie existence. The silence lasted for who knows how long before one of the cultists broke the silence and turned towards the one seated in a chair who appeared to be the leader. "O Venerable One, why have you graced Wikidor with your presence?" Carlo's divine blessing had returned to me, the one addressed as the Venerable One answered hoarsely. "He's dead." "What?" The cultist beside the bed was left in disbelief. "He was already good with the sword before he joined us, and most mortals would never win against him after gaining divine blessing." A more well-rounded figure seated to the Venerable One's right hand added. "Could it have been a bishop of the brilliant white church who killed him? But they don't have any churches nearby." "No," the black corpsefly planted in his body informed me that it was the princess. The Venerable One said. The silent room broke into whispers. The others found that news hard to digest. It was true that as the former captain of the Imperial Guard, Carlo's skill with the sword was above the crowd amongst the masses, and one would require overwhelming numbers or supernatural ability to defeat him. Moreover, after Carlo had received the buff from Rotten Bones' power, his weakness as a mortal in terms of defense and limited stamina were solved despite his stiffer movements. That was definitely a huge increase of ability that almost made him a killing machine. In comparison, the princess who believed in a non-existent god of games and therefore essentially believed in nothing was at best a fine swordswoman. She would never have held her own against Carlo. Quiet. The venerable one growled with his hoarse voice. Even if he was not loud, the other cultists stopped whispering immediately, and the room was completely silent once again. The Rotten Bones was not a peaceful religion where every member existed in harmony and equality. Only the strong survive was a fundamental doctrine, and if not for their own evil god's prohibition, everyone would probably be killing each other for the divine power imbued into their bodies. With such an environment, becoming a venerable one of the 3 bishops of their cult took someone with enough power that ordinary cultists would never dare to confront him. I know all of you couldn't believe it, but that's precisely why I have come to Wicador. As he spoke, the venerable one brought out a silver bowl and a palm-sized colored glass bottle. He opened the bottle rather awkwardly and poured the silver fluid within into the bowl. Then, he hesitated for a moment before using his sharp nails to tear a cut into his rigid flesh and drip black blood into the owl as well. Moments later, the silver fluid in the bowl began to churn, a fearsome but unusual skull appearing from within. Once that skeleton appeared, the other cultists all went on all fours as if crushed beneath a force of 10,000 tons, devotedly and fearfully pressing their heads on the floor. The skull spoke despite having nothing resembling vocal cords. It was a noise that could not be understood, as if something sharp was scratching blackboard. It also resembled the hostile dark miasma of swamps, a blasphemous language containing a vicious influence that exerts itself on the spirit of all mortals, reducing them to a darker species. The voice would resound even in the heads of imbeciles, and the blind would be able to see the call from hell and abyss. Only those with the firmest faith in their gods could withstand the impact from the other side. For it was the voice of an evil god. I have caught the scent of an unknown god. Catch her and sacrifice her as an offering to the great Rotten Bones. I shall claim the power of the god she prays to. As you wish, my lord. It was only the Rotten Bones archbishop who could hang on to his rationality in the face of their own god's presence, albeit barely. He was not sprawled on the floor and shaking, and could answer in complete reverence at the end. The skull formed from silver fluid nodded in satisfaction, before vanishing and reverting to liquid that dropped into the bowl once again. It was only then that the others breathed a sigh of relief and could finally lift their heads. Just as our Lord Rotten Bones has said, make haste and find that princess, and sacrifice her to our great God. Lord Rotten Bones can consume other gods to ascend his rank. The day would come that we would no longer have to hide in shadows, to fight against those churches who proclaim themselves justice. The archbishop pocketed the silver bowl, his shriveled face showing a different look now that combines excitement and wild passion. Rotten Bones shall walk the earth. Rotten Bones shall walk the earth. Wilf, can't you reconsider? The chief of Silver Chime's Wicador branch tried to persuade the traveling merchant patiently. You can't find a merchant guild as good as Silver Chime nowadays. If you leave now, all your previous work would go down the drain. It's fine, I've stilled my heart for it, Marnie Wilf replied without hesitation. All right, if you have already set your mind on it. The branch chief sighed, before finally stamping Marnie's resignation and sealing it inside an envelope that he would send to headquarters. That said, why do you insist on leaving? Could you have found some new frontier? It's nothing. It's just that I'm renouncing my faith in Gaglamia, the goddess of prosperity. Marnie nonchalantly shifted the conversation. By the way, aren't there more refugees around here in Wicador?